In the year 2002, the United States thought it had already seen the worst corporate scandal in its history with Enron. It was wrong. Just months after Enron imploded, a company called WorldCom revealed an $11 billion accounting fraud that made Enron look almost modest by comparison. This is the story of Bernie Ebbers, a basketball coach from Mississippi who somehow became the king of American telecommunications, and how his desperate need to stay rich destroyed a company, wiped out billions in savings for ordinary Americans, and sent him to prison for the rest of his life. Before we get into the details, ask yourself this. If your boss told you to falsify the company books, what would you do? Because that is exactly the choice that Scott Sullivan, WorldCom CFO, made in the late 1990s, and his answer changed American corporate history forever. Bernie Ebbers was not supposed to be a billionaire. He was born in Edmonton, Canada in 1941, the son of a traveling salesman. He played basketball well enough to get a college scholarship, but was never destined for professional sports. He worked as a milkman, a bar bouncer, and a basketball coach before stumbling into the telecommunications business almost by accident. In 1983, he and some friends invested in a small long-distance telephone reseller called Long Distance Discount Services, known as LDDS, based in Hattiesburg, Mississippi. Ebbers became CEO not because he had telecommunications expertise, but because he was the most aggressive personality in the room. That aggression would define everything that followed. Ebbers had one strategy and one strategy only: buy competitors, absorb them, and report the combined revenues as growth. It was financial engineering disguised as business genius. Throughout the 1980s and 90s, LDDS acquired dozens of smaller telecom companies. In 1995, LDDS changed its name to WorldCom, a name that reflected Ebbers' ambitions. In 1997, WorldCom made the acquisition that truly put it on the map when it purchased MCI Communications for $37 billion, creating the second largest long-distance carrier in the United States. At its peak, WorldCom handled half of all internet traffic in America and owned the infrastructure that kept the modern digital economy running. Bernie Ebbers was worth over $1 billion on paper, celebrated as a visionary genius by Wall Street analysts who should have known better. But the acquisition strategy had a fatal flaw. Every time WorldCom bought a company, it took on more debt. The telecom boom of the 1990s masked this problem because revenues were growing and stock prices were soaring. Ebbers borrowed hundreds of millions of dollars personally, using his WorldCom stock as collateral to fund various side businesses, including a cattle ranch, a lumber company, and a yacht building operation. He was living like a king on borrowed money backed by stock in a company that was itself built on borrowed money. When the dot-com bubble burst in 2000 and the telecom sector collapsed, the entire house of cards began to shake. WorldCom stock fell from $64 per share in 1999 to under $2 by mid-2002. As the stock fell, Ebbers faced margin calls on his personal loans. The board of directors, in an act of stunning negligence, approved over $400 million in personal loans to Ebbers to keep him from having to sell his stock, which would have driven the price down further. This was not a business decision. It was a desperate attempt to prop up a fiction, and when that fiction could no longer be maintained, what happened next was criminal. Scott Sullivan, WorldCom CFO, was the architect of the fraud. Beginning in 2000, Sullivan and his team began booking normal operating expenses as capital expenditures. This sounds technical, but the concept is simple. Operating expenses reduce profits immediately, while capital expenditures are spread out over years. By reclassifying billions in costs, WorldCom could report profits it was not actually making. Between 2000 and 2002, WorldCom fraudulently booked approximately $3.8 billion this way, later revised upward to $11 billion total when investigators dug deeper. Ebbers claimed he knew nothing about the accounting manipulation. Prosecutors would later argue he knew everything. The fraud unraveled not because of government regulators or sophisticated Wall Street analysts, but because of a single internal auditor named Cynthia Cooper. Cooper was WorldCom Vice President of Internal Audit, a quiet, methodical accountant from Clinton, Mississippi. In early 2002, she began noticing irregularities in WorldCom accounts. Her boss, Scott Sullivan, told her to stop investigating and to stay in her lane. She did not stop. Working nights and weekends with a small team to avoid detection, Cooper traced the fraudulent entries through WorldCom systems. In June 2002, she presented her findings to the Audit Committee of the Board of Directors. Within days, WorldCom disclosed the fraud to the public. The company fired Scott Sullivan immediately. Bernie Ebbers had already resigned as CEO in April, claiming the stress was affecting his health. On July 21, 2002, WorldCom filed for bankruptcy protection. At the time, it was the largest bankruptcy filing in American history, with $107 billion in assets. 17,000 employees lost their jobs on that single day. Pension funds and retirement accounts that had invested heavily in WorldCom stock were devastated. Individual investors who had trusted the company lost everything. The collapse wiped out approximately $180 billion in market value. The economic damage radiated outward across the entire telecommunications industry, triggering layoffs and bankruptcies at dozens of related companies. The criminal investigation moved quickly by federal standards. Scott Sullivan pleaded guilty in 2004 and agreed to cooperate with prosecutors in exchange for a reduced sentence. He became the government key witness against Ebbers. The trial of Bernie Ebbers began in January 2005 in a Manhattan federal court. Prosecutors argued that Ebbers, as CEO, must have known about the fraud given his obsessive attention to financial details and his regular demands for better numbers from his finance team. The defense argued that Ebbers was a dealmaker, not an accountant, and that Sullivan had deceived him. The jury did not believe Ebbers. On March 15, 2005, he was convicted on all 9 counts against him, including securities fraud, conspiracy, and filing false documents with regulators. On July 13, 2005, Judge Barbara Jones sentenced Bernie Ebbers to 25 years in federal prison, effectively a life sentence for the 63-year-old defendant. Ebbers sat in the courtroom holding his wife's hands as the sentence was read. His lawyer argued it was excessive. The judge disagreed, noting the extraordinary scope of the harm caused. Scott Sullivan received a 5-year sentence in exchange for his cooperation, which many observers considered extraordinarily lenient given his central role in designing the fraud. Cynthia Cooper, the internal auditor who uncovered everything, was named one of Time magazine Persons of the Year in 2002 alongside Sharon Watkins of Enron and Colleen Rowley of the FBI. She later wrote a book about her experience called Extraordinary Circumstances. Bernie Ebbers began serving his sentence at the Oakdale Federal Correctional Institution in Louisiana. He maintained his innocence throughout his imprisonment, claiming Sullivan had acted alone. In 2019, Ebbers' lawyers successfully argued for compassionate release based on his deteriorating health, including severe heart problems and advancing dementia. He was released in December 2019 at age 78 and died at his home in Mississippi on February 2, 2020, just months after his release. He never admitted guilt. The WorldCom scandal, coming so close on the heels of Enron, triggered a fundamental change in American corporate governance. Congress passed the Sarbanes-Oxley Act in 2002, which required CEOs and CFOs to personally certify the accuracy of financial statements and imposed criminal penalties for false certifications. The law also strengthened whistleblower protections and increased oversight of auditing firms. Whether Sarbanes-Oxley actually prevented future fraud is debated. The 2008 financial crisis, which also involved massive deception, suggests the lesson was only partially learned. What WorldCom ultimately reveals is something uncomfortable about how we measure business success. Ebbers was celebrated as a genius for years because the stock price kept rising and the acquisitions kept coming. Wall Street analysts issued buy recommendations even as the warning signs multiplied. Board members approved loans to the CEO rather than asking hard questions. Auditors from Arthur Andersen, the same firm that failed at Enron, missed the fraud entirely. The system that was supposed to catch this